But really, what I want to do is kind of approach understanding the nature of reality. And what I mean by that is the way we take a look at cosmology from a different angle, particularly phenomenological. And I'll get into that meaning as well. And then coming from my culture, what I've been able to enmesh with from my heritage, which would be tantric philosophy. Okay. Let's hope that this goes. Okay, great. A little bit about me. So I grew up in Georgia for the most part, and I went to school at Georgia Tech to get a bachelor's in computer science. I was a software
For me.
engineer. So a little bit of like my mental health background. It's gonna be dark for a second, but we're gonna bring it back into the light. I've had a history of working with CPTSD, having a dissociative freeze state for 24 years, working with depersonalization, derealization, psychosis. I currently have epilepsy, which means I get seizures, but it's managed by medicine. Those seizures are also a byproduct of trauma and the way that I could process efficiently. And, self-harm thoughts that have been very serious 2 times in my life. Um, and I've been able to come out from almost all of it, besides epilepsy. That's still something that needs medication. I'm hoping to kind of do some more research and try to get myself away from medication altogether. But ever since I was a young child, I have always had a penchant for dark consciousness and understanding how the universe works. And those two things seem so opposite to each other, but this philosophy that I'm about to introduce actually says that they are one and the same. And who knows, maybe my penchant for dark consciousness kind of came back onto me first, and I needed to learn how to deal with that on my own to be able to give information like this to people. So I have been in Denver, Colorado for 2.5 years. I moved May 2022, and that's when my DPDR and psychosis. I had an episode about 8 to 9 months lasting. Very, very terrible. I even had like a unaliving timer on myself because it was just so bad. And that's when I had to shift styles of therapy from talk to somatic to get out of my head and get back into my body, which I'm sure a lot of us in this chat right now are very cerebral, intellectual style human beings. So maybe you will find some of this information to resonate. And that's when I kind of discovered the esoteric wisdom of Kashmiri Shaivism. And basically, like, I'm not joking, from like a one-to-one standpoint of all symptoms, it talked about everything I'd gone through, but then talked about how it was a form of elevating consciousness, awakening, and getting into a new way of being that was almost healthier and more expansive than one could imagine, which really kind of was so a total 180 from having to deal with people telling you that this is a disorder and this is like the final state. But it's great to see that there's ancient wisdom that actually sees otherwise. And in tandem, I happened to start learning a little bit more about quantum reality. It was all on my TikTok For You page, so that's kind of how I got started. But just having the background in tech too, I got really interested in cosmology and the intersection of the mind and the way we understand it, and is there a better way to look at things? So that's why I'm kind of here. I'm working towards a second career. Software engineering was not cutting it for me anymore. I don't think corporate life cuts it for anybody in this chat. And I'm kind of working off my savings here, just trying to like do the due diligence of research and see if I can get kind of far with this and kind of change what I do altogether as a career. Um, so, kind of going into the name phenomenal cosmic power, if you guys haven't seen Aladdin, this is where that phrase kind of comes from. It was embedded into me for as long as I can remember. And this is where Genie is sort of like saying phenomenal cosmic power. And then the next image is like itty bitty living space. And there's just so much wisdom, I think, sometimes in a lot of these children's shows, because there's the more I started actually looking into different ideas of reality and how to approach it, I came across this term actually called phenomenology, which is studying consciousness, the sentience, the awareness, the inner experience of things that seems to be so damn subjective, right? And it's something that's a volatile system that we don't end up really having like an answer towards. But there is this cosmic power, this connection to something outside of us as well. And the itty bitty living space, I mean, we're a bag of bones. We're this in this meat suit temporarily. And so there's just so much to discover in who we are as people in our time here. And that can also come from disorder. And so this idea of phenomenal cosmic power, I was saying it as a joke starting since like 2019. And it turns out that there is some truth and depth to this because it is our true nature. And everything I'm going to talk about in the slides moving forward is posited on this idea idea that the external cosmos are a projection of our internal consciousness, and the sort of I guess the delta there is not being able to get that one to one, and how can we kind of fix those pieces together to reflect what we want. And so Tantra is this accessible way of actually learning about astrophysical and consciousness phenomena. And I say accessible because primarily they work with mythologies, and this is why a lot of people will write things off. But what they don't understand is, for the people that were commoners, and they needed to understand these deeper topics and elevate, right? How can they do this if they don't understand basic formulas, or if they haven't had this sort of education? But everybody understands storytelling. And so that is something I'm here to also debunk too, kind of just going towards the mythology. A really quick example for the yoga girly pops, Shavasana, when you get into the ending pose and you're lying down, that actually comes from the mythology of the Shiva Shakti model, where Shakti is kind of standing atop of Shiva. And it's this dominance assertion to kind of let you know that you are in surrender, that you cannot have stillness without expressive movement in the universe. You cannot have expressive movement or any object taking place without something observing. And that is a lot of, what the observer effect is about in quantum physics. So a lot of these things that may seem like little stories for like, funsies and for kids actually have been speaking to some deeper truths. So a little submodel structure I want to follow here for the slides moving forward as well. So in the sphere of mapping external to internal, there is this fundamental thing my culture follows of creator, preserver, destroyer. And this is just really beautiful because this applies to all things and all aspects of life, as I'll demonstrate in the next slide. And then these are also kind of the deities that represent the phenomena that takes place, but everything even down to thoughts, down to like, creations like sand dunes and things like that. They have to be created, preserved a certain way, and destroyed, and the cycle will continue. So I hope that people can see things clearly here because my screen kind of shows everyone's faces on the side. But let's get into that aspect of creation, preservation, and destruction, right? That's there on the left-hand side. So we got, our friends here, our friends are showing up here now. All right. So we have the mind, the body. And now if you'll notice, I've kind of broken up the cosmos, and I will allude to this in later slides. So I've kind of broken it up into the soul layer and the physical universe layer. We'll touch on that some more. Again, don't worry about the complexity, just enjoy the ride. And I'll be touching on everything more and more. But when we look at the mind, and that's particularly where I would like to focus on, but it's also connected, there is a generation of idea, new thoughts, new paradigms, right? And maintaining thoughts as well. What kind of gets stuck? And if we think about things like OCD as well, being inefficiently stuck in our minds in one particular way, things being preserved. And then like the bottom portion, destruction, right? What thoughts do we choose to destroy? Or does it even feel like we have a choice sometimes, based on what we're going through in life? And then in the body, like when there's regeneration of cells, collagen renewal, all of that, maintaining homeostasis, breath patterns, down to like aging, and I guess a bodily destruction would equate to death, not to be too dark, but that's where it is. And then at the soulful level, the thing that I am pretty disappointed by in the scientific community, we don't touch on this enough as we should. But this is where there's a lot of, I think, the primary issue of not feeling connected, and the source of a lot of issues. But my goal is to kind of bring this to light. And so you'll see creation, sustenance, and destruction there, but it's in this evolved enlightenment stage. You're learning things for the first time, you're expanding. What do you choose to do with that? And one of the things my somatic therapist would tell me too is anytime you are expanding, you want to take a pause, right? You don't want to keep going forever because you need to have preservation, maintenance, homeostasis there. And then all the way down to the physical universe out there with stars, galaxies, like you go from forming elements with nucleosynthesis in the early universe all the way down to like galaxies forming and existing around each other, and then the destruction of that, right? So I think it's actually so beautiful that, while everything seems so different and we see a diversity of life, however you want to define life, there is this framework that it seems to follow. So I have this thing saying take a moment to recognize what consciousness may mean for you, but since we don't have time to discuss too much, I would just love to hear people's thoughts later on in the discussion board. But when we talk about consciousness, one thing I've noticed is that we talk about what it means to be alive and intelligently alive, but intelligent in the way that we define it, which is so fascinating because there's this book by James Bridle. I don't remember the name right now, but it's The Search for Planetary Intelligence, something like this. And there's this human consciousness and other life forms, right? And I've noticed that we are actually quite parasitic in nature. We're predatory. If there's aliens coming down to get us, we are all turning against each other. I really don't have hope for people really trying to like help each other out as much. And you have the bystander effect and all of that. But you take a look at mycelium networks, you take a look at tree root systems. I was on a walk in New Mexico in these mountains, and I had seen this beautiful tree been struck down by lightning, like right in the center. But from that striking, it actually kind of diverged off into two separate little trees, and it was flourishing. It had its leaves, all of it. And this is because the tree root system network is aware when something goes down. They're communal. They want to feed it those resources. They want to communicate, right? And even that's like a physical form, but the study of thermodynamics itself, right? Like what does that mean? Thermodynamics, thermo is heat is generated from movement comes from vibration, right? And dynamics, just studying like relationship studies in between these things. So even in thermodynamics, there's a way you can call something alive depending on how you define it, right? Is it something that counts? Is it something that responds to stimuli? Is it something that gives and receives? Are we truly the only form of intelligence? Like I would almost argue we're a little bit inefficient because we need to like text and have like tone and emojis, but trees can kind of just vibe and like get the message across, right? So this is the reason I've actually brought all this up is I want to bring some legitimacy here to the concept of a soul, to a concept of consciousness, because so many people dismiss this, and it doesn't change the fact that we are affected by this thing that is larger than what we can see with limited human perception. Okay, so coming to Tantra philosophy, right, tying it all together, I've broken it down into what it is and what it is not, and this is probably going to be my favorite slide in all of this. So Tantra is broken down means tan meaning to weave and tra meaning instrument. So here you would be the instrument, and weaving means weaving, expanding with cosmic consciousness and human consciousness. And my favorite part would have to be the pillars. This actually totally defies what society tells you to do, which is great. I would say everyone should kind of hop onto this. But here are the four pillars. We have Artha, which means resources, opportunities, and wealth. So like if you're talking to someone, it doesn't mean they're like throwing money at you per se, but the wealth could be the wisdom of the mind, right? We have Kama, which is desire, something that's so deeply human. And a lot of times we only resort Kama to lust. I mean, there is a reason that tantric sex exists, and it's definitely bastardized, but that's a whole separate topic. But the point is, everything is seen as a very natural state of desire. If you want it, there is some degree to which you can have it. That thing wants you back. Really beautiful philosophy. Dharma, purpose or duty of the soul. Right. That is also a place where we don't feel like, and it's definitely a privilege thing, and that's a gap I would love to close somehow in my lifetime. But like, are you honoring your dharma, the reason why you're here? And moksha, the ultimate purpose of doing any of this is to liberate ourselves. If you don't like the word soul, I don't mind it. We can talk about liberating yourself from societal expectations, norms, just like hearing things. And if you're ever sitting there wondering, like, does it always have to be this way? Is life truly this miserable? Like, can there be more? If you're asking that, that's great news. Like you are on the path to getting to that stage. There's a lot of validity there, right? And what I love is if you look at this third bullet point where we talk about going across multiple layers of our physical and consciousness existence, cosmology, quantum reality, consciousness studies, vibration, right? All of these things that the West has a word for, there is a text specifically to understand. For example, for consciousness studies, we have the Shiva Sutras, where every line basically tells you how your mind is able to behave. And I'm not going to lie, guys, like I had to reference that to actually get myself out of a lot of DPDR episodes because it was far more expansive than like, some potential psychiatrist being like, wow, Shivani, looks like this is the end. You might need some help, or this might be your final form. And I was like, no, there's more to it than that. And it's so much about personal power. And I love that because it's recognizing your true nature, recognizing how powerful you are, and the tools you can have to heal yourself. So let's go and talk about what it is not. Okay, it is not a live, laugh, love philosophy. If that's what you want, there are plenty of groups out here in Denver that just focus on blissful ignorance. Have at it, guys. Enjoy it, but this is not it. There's literally a text called Aghora Tantra, which is arguably the philosophy of darkness. And what's so interesting about this is Aghoris in India, basically these people that like have like lots of drugs and alcohol, or some of them wear skulls of other human beings around their neck, but they aren't really trying to harm anyone. And really, this is kind of this push against puritanical society, right? Saying like, hey, this is also divine, because this is such an it is what it is philosophy. We assign the value of whether we think something is bad or good, or is gross or not. I mean, when you really think about like why we find things disgusting, it is something that is socialized, and everyone is just kind of trying to find their alignment there. And also when it comes to philosophy, one thing I noticed quite a bit is people like turn their nose up and put their pinkies in the air and just all of a sudden think that they can ignore human suffering, or that they're just like better than everyone else. And I put edgy nihilism on here because that is something I see. Like, people have this mindset of like, nobody understands the pain that I feel. Things are very like meaningless, and things are this and things are that. Yes and no, right? Because there's lossy data from like Eastern tradition translation into English, which we need to account for. But also there's more to the story, and it is one that is full of love and compassion. That is the core tenet of this kind of stuff. And Tantra is never going to invite you to see something as outside of you that's going to save you or help you. Everything you need, even the ability to ask for help, that thing is inside of you. And a lot of society, what does it do? It tries to sell you things and let you know that there's nothing you can do really on your own, right? So this is definitely counterculture, even to philosophies in India, because there's a lot of belief systems that engage in casteism, like hierarchy of caste and who's better, and that's what determines your liberation in life. But Tantra says, actually, no, you can get that in this lifetime. There's nothing outside of you. There's nothing you have to wait for. Everything that you would need is right here. And the most important point, exiting Maya. Maya is Sanskrit for illusion. We'll touch on that later. But there's this attachment that people seem to have to exiting the matrix. And then when you ask them, like, what's your idea of exiting the matrix? It's like every step to get back into the matrix. Like, I want a Lambo, I want all this money, I want to do this, I want to do that. It doesn't make sense to me. But just know, as long as the universe exists, as long as there is a reality, it is Maya. For something to exist, it will be in Maya. And it's, again, not inherently a bad or a good thing, guys, to be in it, because we all play a larger part in this role. But it becomes a problem when there's an attachment. That's really where we want to be mindful, because being attached to even being detached, I see people look at this the wrong way. They'll be like, my philosophy says to detach, so I don't really care about my kids. I don't care about my partner. No, that doesn't help you at all. You are not living within your purpose, right? Okay, let me just reference back those four pillars right over here. So just make sure you're combining those elements together. Okay. And ultimately, Tantra, now this is, I want to actually admit here, this is a very difficult place to get to for anybody. Anytime something exists in nature, it introduces a polarity. I think a lot of us know this. And the goal with non-dual awareness is to rise above these dualities ethically. And this means not without accountability, right? So like, if someone is being super terrible to me, and then I finally respond back and I punch them in the face, and their reaction is like, whoa, just take it easy, man. Like, why can't we all just get along? Like, well, because you've been bullying me for so long, and like, yeah, I get punching you back isn't great, but like, I'm not just going to like live, laugh, love my way through this, which is what a lot of cultures and belief systems will want you to do. But the goal really is to come to unitary consciousness. And, there's this idea, even with other indigenous wisdoms, like they kind of want to stay in the realm of like, if you are familiar with chakra systems and the heart, the throat, the head, the third eye, the crown, they just want to be here all the time. So Tantra also says, no, no, no. You need to be able to work within your root and stick with yourself there and be seated in your reality, in your existence. You're here for a reason. Acknowledge that. And you're not supposed to be afraid of any thing that could happen to you that's bad. You shouldn't be so affected by things that are good. People who are into like day trading, they probably know this really well. But this is really hard to do. Like, of course, if I get $1 million and I get to do a resort in Bali, I'm going to feel great. But then if the CIA is torturing me, I'm going to feel awful because I'm human. So the point is not to like get into this level of perfectionism, guys, on either end. It is just to do your best, right? Being aware of these polarities and how to move in between them is enough. And this is where a sense of self-concept is going to be very key. Not something I'll address in this talk, but like as we go on and we address like, scrupulosity, OCD, and all that kind of stuff. We'll touch more back onto this place. A little bit of a jump here. So when I said I was really interested in, the cosmos, I've always been a child that was into the multiverse theory and nonlinear time, just something I felt was absolutely the truth, just because the way I took a look at existence was probabilistically speaking, anything that can exist likely will. It's just that we haven't observed it, so we just don't think that it does. And so, on in researching over time, I was finding this wonderful quantum multiverse theory. And I think that it's beautifully put. It puts everything I've been feeling into a statement, and it's still a theory. But there's this idea that like everything is existing in a probabilistic state as like a wave function, and any way you can measure that makes something in a quantum sense behave classically. I'll touch more on those definitions in further slides. But yeah, like everything that we can kind of collapse can become our reality. But there's so much more to it than that. It's not like if you were out on the side of the street, right? God forbid. And then in your mind, you're thinking, I have $1 million. And like it shows up, that's some stuff that people sell to you online and they want you to buy their course. And guys, that's not how it works. There's a lot more to it than that, but they are on the right track that like there is a reality there, and the latency, meaning the time delay, is more based on actions you can take to get there. But really what we have is the eternal now. When I talk about linear time, I mean, cyclic time is really what this philosophy studies, but how we experience it is past, present, future. But technically, like right now, as you're listening, that second just went by, then that second just went by, then that one. So all we have is right now, and we don't have the concept of the past, and we're always projecting onto the future. But what's interesting about time too is I believe there's like a function in thermodynamics. I gotta look it up, but it's time is dependent on focus and mindfulness, right? Anytime you're utilizing all five of your senses, like my school in like 10th grade, it would get out at 3:25, and at 3:20 those 5 minutes felt like 5 years to me because all five of my senses were involved. But also like even what you choose to focus on, or like if you're maladaptive daydreaming, all of a sudden how did 5 hours go by, right? So time really is an experience, and everything really is happening. And so I mean, there's a lot of different ways people go about this, but understanding what is free will versus destiny, in my experience, the way I've kind of come to terms with it is it depends on how you look at it. I do feel that both do and don't exist, because if there's infinite realities, everything that ever could be, then in that infinite reality, everything is preset because it's one of infinite. If you want something slight deviation, just jump to the next one. I don't know how to really do that, but I'm just saying, supposedly you could do it that way. Okay, I've talked a lot about this fun word quantum. I think we hear about it all the time, everywhere. So let's talk about what it officially means. Officially in Latin, it just means how much. I believe this term kind of came about with the double slit experiment, where there was wave particle duality, depending on how you observe light, when they were trying to figure out what a photon is or how light presents itself. Is it a particle or is it a wave? But like coming into the definition of quantum, it was the smallest identifiable packets of data rather than a continuous stream. So just something you can count. That's a good way to think about it. And also now it is a term referencing the antithesis of classical, meaning like a non-classical way of looking at physics, reality, and computing. So when we take a look at the idea of quantum reality, things like superposition, how something can be everywhere, everything everywhere all at once, like the movie, until it is observed. Entanglement, something that directly defies, that there's a ceiling on speed, that it has to be the speed of light. But no, like I believe it's Bell's theorem, something we'll also get into in future talks, not in this slide. But this idea that like if there's, no matter the time and the distance, one particle here is affected, there's another one over there. When we look at physics, I'm delving a little bit into quantum tunneling, but wave particle duality, like I mentioned, and the uncertainty principle, like not knowing what's going on really until you can observe it. And I don't know how much people have been keeping up with what's going on with tech, but like there's Willow, Google's quantum chip that's come out. But there's a lot of fascinating stuff with that, with like high speed and like wonderful things scientists have been able to come up with, like Hadamard gates, to have a qubit operate like it's in superposition by making it both the value of like 0 and 1 at the same time. So there are practical implications for this. That's the main point. Not to just bore you with, STEM lecturing, but this all has validity, and I'm really glad that like we can look at it objectively. But now coming into pointer states, this is something very interesting. So when something exists in superposition and all that it can be, that is called coherence. And when we observe things and it comes down to, like, if you're wondering, like what's in the box, it's this cat, right? And finally you observe a cat and the behavior of the cat, it meows and does all of that. So basically that transition period in between, what survives coherence up until decoherence, are these measurable states called pointer states. And they emerge through decoherence. They're resilient to the disturbance. And it's not something I think that is directly measured, but rather inferred. But a quick example could be like when you have a thought in your mind and you're thinking about like a memory, and then there's like a bodily reaction as a result. Your body in some ways is holding on to this data that would be from pointer states. Pointer states are typically using like quantum computing, quantum physics measurements, but I'm very consciously applying it to the consciousness layer. So, given that we have these pointer states, this kind of is my segue into talking about now some of the esoteric stuff. Shiv and Shakti. What is this? Inseparable sides of the cosmos, the inception of what makes everything, everything, right? So Shiv represents the consciousness layer of the cosmos. Really, I'm doing this injustice by talking about it as if they're separate things. They're actually one, but because I'm giving a presentation, this is what I have to do. Shakti would be the thermodynamics layer of the cosmos. And so Shiv represents a state of coherence, everything that's possible, right? Thought matter, being in meditation, stillness, dark matter. So Shakti would be kind of like, the opposing force where it's actually decoherence when you see something in manifest, tangible 3D form. Expression, movement, instead of dark matter, there's dark energy, something that actually has like gravitational impact, right? And again, like a lot of these graphics, right, they seem to be very, mythology oriented, but it is just such a beautiful way of actually tying together these two big truthful things. Now, what I have in between here, and the reason I brought up pointer states was to say there's this transition where you move from one state of being to another. How do you go from being absolutely nothing? How do you go from being absolute consciousness into something that takes form in life? Where does that come from? Why does that happen, right? And so that's where the tattvas are going to be introduced. The tattvas are the principles of reality. So we'll delve deeper into that now. I could make a whole presentation devoted to the Shiv Tattvas. I mean, this to me is my secret sauce that I've been really vibing with when it comes to understanding reality. So this is a bi-directional flow of how things come in and out of existence. There's 36 levels. Again, we will do deep dives on this later on, but I just want to just touch on the brilliance of this, right? So we have this perfect union, like everything that can kind of completely be together. And then it starts slowly breaking down, right? And that's where Shiv and Shakti, these layers of the universe, come in. And then remember what I said earlier on, as long as something exists in reality, it is Maya. So now you see the veil of concealment, Maya, begin to take place. These interactions of particles with each other, it's manifesting into a universe, right? And I guess this is very human-centric because I'm noticing skin, eyes, and tongue, and the ways that human beings have them. But basically, as you kind of go down in these layers, what we'll also notice is this form of entropy, which, if you're not familiar with the definition, it's the tendency for things to go into disorder and chaos, right? And break down into their constituents. So we're going all the way from absolute everything to being just us simple human beings, right? And then in the opposite direction, there's, I believe the pronunciation is negentropy or negative entropy, but just kind of coming back into unification. It's not going to be with the exact same things, though. This is where this needs its own deep dive. Like if I take a candle and I'm burning it out and like when the smoke goes away, that heat has transferred into the smokiness. I can't make the smokiness come back and turn into like a, that's not how it works. But again, that's generally the idea. This is how things work. You come from this big unification reality all the way down to its most broken down parts, as small as you can go. And it's also very possible to kind of get into that same place, that level of unification and coming together as one. And it really describes, the oscillation of the universe. So Mahatattvas, real quick. Mahatattvas, oops, sorry. They begin at the concealment of Maya, where you see here, and then where you guys see individual consciousness and primordial nature. So primordial here means the inception, the beginning, early universe, right? So let's talk about the Mahatattvas and its comparison to the Shiv Tattvas. The Mahatattvas are a subset. Shiv Tattvas, they explain everything. Mahatattvas are really interesting in that they are more explicit about how things come to be, the individualizing of different life forms and how those break down. And the reason I'm separating the two at all, instead of just talking about the Shiv Tattvas, is we need to know what we're working with, where we can touch things and observe. And if I am to enter the realm of understanding the mind and dark consciousness, I need to know or have things that I can physically sort of work with. And that's where the Mahatattvas are great for that principle of reality. And when you want to expand beyond your understanding of human things, that's when you want to understand the Shiv Tattvas a little bit more. Again, will be deep dives later on in later talks. One thing I do want to touch on that's beyond everything. We kind of talked about this. Shunya. I don't know if anyone's heard of Shunya or Shunyata, but Shunya means the void. Shunyata, I believe, for Tantra has Kashmiri, Shaivism, and Tibetan Buddhism as like the sister belief systems. But for Tibetan Buddhism, Shunyata is the truth. Shunyata means that the truth is that there's nothingness. Actually, to even say the word emptiness and nothingness is blasphemy, because if it's truly emptiness, I shouldn't give it a word. Once you give it a word, it has a form. When it's a form, it's a concept, and it's not really emptiness anymore, is it? So if people are like, what's shunya? I'm just like, yo, okay. But that's kind of the way you want to look at it. And if we're talking about Shiva, right, it is, Shunyata is the unmanifest form of Shiva, what you don't see, parts of the universe that aren't observable, right? That's what Shiv represents. It's the liminal space between death and rebirth, expansion and contraction. If you're looking at a sine wave, you're talking about that inflection point right there. Again, for the edgy bros that get nihilistic, right? Shunyata is not about being nothing in a nihilistic sense, but it's actually realizing that there's no causality, right? Like there's an example I was reading about, like if you plant a seed into this soil and it turns into this plant, the plant was a result of the seed. And there's just so much breaking down of that, linear time representation was like, actually, there's not just this that causes that. There's this emergence, this is interconnectedness with everything in the universe. That seed also didn't come from nowhere. It's almost false to say that this tree comes from like a seed in the soil. And so if you get deeper and deeper into the idea, where it kind of leads you is to understanding that like when there is nothingness, you have access to what the other side is, which is everything. So for Shunya, the actual opposite is called Purnam. And that makes sense because when there is nothing around you, then you must be everything, right? Or like when people think about when you're in the darkness all the time, they're like, look around, maybe you're the light. Like this is kind of that idea. And it's the space of all possibilities. It's where things are pregnant with opportunity, actually. And Shunya and quantum computing actually have there's some fun intersections there. It's definitely something I'm going to talk more about in future thoughts. But like, talks, excuse me. But the reason I bring up Shunya is before the Shiv Tattvas even begin. Like, there's Shiv and Shakti. They're all actually one. But before them, there's nothingness. There's just nothingness. And all we're trying to do is understand this nothingness. But it's not nothingness that lasts forever. It is just part of the process. So cluing in a little bit there into the fact that there's no sense of absolutism in this philosophy. Yeah, we kind of went over this where I was talking about how it's before or beyond the Shiv Tattvas, has lots of potential. It's beyond duality. Okay, Spandakarika. So I've talked about the tattvas. I've talked about the movement between consciousness into manifest reality and all of these things. How is this movement taking place? Nobody really told me this. I've just been kind of putting thoughts together. So Spanda is Sanskrit for vibration. Spandakarika is Sanskrit for doctrine of vibration. It represents the first movement of vibration from consciousness, from stillness to manifestation. So when you're talking about how can we go from bottom, top down, bottom up, how do we communicate in between the layers of reality? This is going to be your answer through vibration, right? And the great thing is, it's actually fascinating. It scales infinitely up and infinitely down, right? There is this movement, this vibration everywhere beyond what we just know with our physical senses. And when there is this desire to align with Spanda, it is, I call it the great cosmic meritocracy because it is so much about alignment. You will get what you are from life or where you want to be and the actions that you take in accordance. Again, the only thing that's holding you back is this level of latency, but don't get it twisted. Like this is the great cosmic algorithm of making things work in order. And this bullet point here where I say operates in spite of your belief system because it's dependent on action, form of karma yoga. This is because I've gone through, a variety of different belief systems. I didn't have anything imposed on me. Then there was a portion of time I was hardcore religious. Then I became hardcore atheist, then agnostic. I call myself a spiritual philosopher now. And yet, and yet, I have come into situations in life that seem to have followed a great order and design, almost perfectly divinely orchestrated, whatever you want to call it. Um, and it had nothing to do with what I believed in, but who I was the entire time. If you stay the same, your actions behave a particular way. Spandakarika operates irrespective of what you choose to call yourself, which is why I think it's the greatest form of meritocracy. And I want to touch on this thing in quantum measurement, 0 point energy, where it's the lowest possible energy a system can have, right? Like you're almost at absolute stillness, but somehow there's no such thing as absolute stillness. So if things are always moving, you can have change. If you can have change, you can have evolution. If you can have evolution, you can have transformation, right? So that's why there's no such thing as absolutism when it comes to these things. Because if things were absolute, they would stay still and never, shift. But if things are always moving and breathing, they can interact with each other, evolve, move on. So yeah, this is basically the language of how energy moves through the Shiv Tattvas both forward and backwards. Some cute little examples. So we go from all the way at the big level of the cyclic universe, the expansion and the contraction, even that, right? The pulsation of that, that's spanda. Your heartbeat, like do 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 do, that's spanda. Electromagnetic waves, light coming in through the window, spanda. Vibrations in the air when you hear a bird going caw, and the sound waves, that's spanda. The thoughts in your mind, the emotions you feel, all of that is spanda. And no need to have perfectionism here. Ideally, it would be really great to have all of that perfectly aligned, but the goal is really to do the best that you can. And I really feel we can apply this doctrine of vibration into the realm of thermodynamics and mapping energy landscapes for all sorts of systems, especially with the mind. Um, so we've kind of touched on this already, but I want to talk about stochastic versus deterministic systems real quick. Stochastic systems happen at a micro scale. They have a lot of randomness. So just like, how little water bubbles kind of show up in like, soda when you like pour it into a cup. And then deterministic is at like a larger scale where things tend to self-organize and go towards order. They both kind of need each other. And, this is again all about thermodynamics, but as I said, that's the Shakti layer. We are not talking about the Shiv layer enough. So what is missing in our understanding of the cosmos? The experiential layer, qualia, if you've ever heard of it. Like right now, I'm wearing a gray shirt. I call it gray, but you could be calling it blue. And what you think is blue, I think is, gray and vice versa. And we have our own definition of things, an inner experience. Like I feel like we have figured out so much about objective reality and what we can observe and sort of all point to and agree on, but we can't do it with our belief systems. And it shifts depending on who observes it. Consciousness models are extremely volatile. You can think about your moods that you feel, or like when you're in a fight in a relationship, and some days you're okay with it. And these are all really dinky examples. I get it, guys. But the point is that we need to have a different way of looking at things because you can't really have a one size fits all model for every type of brain and mind that exists in this reality. Um, so the oscillations of the universe as you go from moving through the Shiv Tattvas, and you have these experiences like, why does it even happen, right? Asking questions like that. So Tantra says it's considered a divine play, Leela. This is the OG version of like you are the universe experiencing itself. It's like you hit this big simulation, you hit play, and let's just see what happens, right? It's kind of like that. And that's how things are sort of panning out. Shiv and Shakti are mirrors of one another, so please keep this in mind, which means that whatever is happening in the external world is happening in our internal reality as well. And I want to actually touch base on yugas, right? So yugas are considered like basically big points of time. They go on for like, eons, eras, long periods of time. I can't remember the words. We are currently in the Kali Yuga, which is, the dark times, just a place of lots of chaos. And there's a way some of these texts, they'll talk about what are the symptoms of whatever yuga you're in. It's interesting because as you go backwards, you go into the Satya Yuga, the people there apparently are just so enlightened during that time period. They're communicating in ways that are so much more like, some of them are saying it's telepathic. It's so much more intelligent. There's so much more harmony. And you kind of think about this enough, and it's like, well, is this not just describing entropy at the consciousness layer as well? That we have more divisiveness as we go down the line in society. We kind of become more individualized, not individuating, where you learn more about yourself, but individualized, more like selfish. And you just kind of keep to yourself, and like you're the smallest units of what you can be, rather than being unified. And so it's interesting because it is part of this divine play. This is just how things happen. And just like a fun little question to think about. I love thought experiments. So when we have an expansion and then a contraction of the universe, you go in and out, you expand, and you break down, and you have, some people call it the big crunch, and then you expand again. There's a way the universe breaks down, and could there be a will in the way the universe breaks down? Why does it choose to break down a particular way? There's infinite ways you can explode and have a big bang. There's infinite ways you can have nucleosynthesis and form, elements. Why did it happen in this particular way? And is it learning from itself, from its mistakes in the previous expansion, right? Could we say this about our mind? Like when we go back into our own way of being and we're in isolation and we're learning more about ourselves. So when we go out again and make a brand new set of friends, again, very simple example, but very important. And the way you choose to like break down and meet people outside of yourself, which they're all you mirroring you back, right? This is what the philosophy says. It's what I abide by. But you change, right? The way you decide to take a look at things and like go into decoherence again, then back into coherence, and back and forth. So just something to think about. If you have thoughts on this, let me know. And ultimately, as I said, anytime something exists, anytime there is a reality of sorts to even call a reality, Maya exists. So, interestingly, I guess like some texts of people just, studying this philosophy, they call it the holographic reality. And, scientists have kind of proven that the universe is not locally real. Our local experience is more so just that, right? It's just an experience. And locality is just this idea that things are only influenced by their immediate surroundings. Again, there's like a limitation on speed. Things can't go faster than the speed of light, all that. And this concept of quantum entanglement suggests non-locality, and that distance and separation, they're all illusions of the mind. We just have an idea of how we count and measure, but at the quantum level, it really doesn't make a difference. And yeah, I don't know if anyone had that moment in physics class where like they learned that we're not ever actually touching anything. We're repelling electrons. And at the lunch table, somebody kind of slaps you in the face and they're like, I didn't slap you. My electrons repelled you. I never did it to anyone, but it definitely happened to me after class. I was like, great. But fun, we're not really touching anything ever. We're just repelling all the time. We have the sensation of touch, but if we were going beyond the repelling, we would kind of just, I would like hold my hands and then they would turn into one hand, and that would be weird, right? And I find Maya to be this super intelligent embodiment of how energy can't be created or destroyed, but it just keeps playing itself out. Like reality just keeps existing until everything like plays out how it needs to. And this kind of steps into the realm of reincarnation. I know that might not align with what everyone thinks about, but to me it makes sense because this philosophy scales up and down, and us in life, a situation will repeat itself consistently until you can make better decisions. So this can go across lifetimes. It can go at a smaller level. and just, thinking about like if there's a will to that. And there's also this idea, I should have put this in the slides, apologies, but of Brahman, right? Like we are all one super consciousness, and that's the nature at the very end of everything, right? And basically, it doesn't really matter. There's no such thing as like an objective will, really. It's just all of our wills matter and like the way we want to see reality. Um, Down to the topic I want to talk about of dark consciousness. I have our friend, the Dementors from Harry Potter, as a graphic here. So, a couple symptoms. This isn't as dark as it gets, but we have, jealousy, possessiveness, lust can turn into people being sexual abusers. I've had that bit of trauma myself, actually, throughout my childhood, people who are murderers, dictators, obsessive thoughts. Okay, so this can be external harm, like you cause external harm, that's what it can do, but also it can trap you, right? With like your reality being bent or having reality-based disorders, like how I had confronted, lack of empathy, narcissism. So we see this, we are aware of its existence. Yes, it's a problem. Um, my criticisms, where I think the colonial approach to health has just gone wrong. We suppress darkness way too much. It's why I see passive aggressive behavior. I like to call myself aggressive aggressive. You don't know how I'm feeling. Like literally, like a passive aggressive behavior is just little bits of your energy coming out because you are so upset by something not working or favoring you, and you don't want to appear to be a certain way. So it comes out in these little streams of like you being upset, meaning, your energy wants to be like taken out, it wants to be converted, it wants to be released. And so I think, therapy is great. Like I'm not against therapy. I've done years of it myself. But there are ways I think it finds to get you to kind of fit into societal structures with cognitive behavioral therapy at times. And I'm starting to wonder if there are situations where it's not necessarily rewiring of maybe you and how you feel about things, but maybe actually making that change really in your life. There could be something deeper, and you don't want to just kind of like think your way out of it or intellectualize it and just, knock it off. And this, can end up forcing blissful ignorance. And the thing is, like I said, Tantra has like this philosophy of darkness, but not because it wants you to stay there. It's because it sees darkness as an opportunity. It is, the most potent with potential to turn into the greatest form of life. If so, light, excuse me, because if something is fairly neutral, you're not really going to get a sense of what direction it's heading in. But like, if you really hate something, it's because once upon a time there was this love and attachment there. Now it's just kind of going in another direction, right? And with puritanical man-made belief systems in the world, even whether you follow them or not, they pervade wellness practices. They show up every single day, right? We other darkness and we call it bad. Like I said, Tantra is an it is what it is philosophy. We just choose to call things bad or good. But when we other darkness, it leads to the separation where we don't integrate with ourselves fully. That is a form of conditional love. I know that we don't want to, glamorize thoughts where we think about torturing people and that's not supposed to be okay. But what's the first step to getting rid of it, right? Because what you resist will persist. So when we other a part of ourselves, like you're literally denying a piece of your consciousness exists, you're denying a piece of your truth and your reality. And one of the examples, mildly dark situation here, but like when you hear about, somebody who will one day like murder all their family, and then they murder themselves, and people are like, what happened? This came out of nowhere, and blah blah blah. And it may appear so like on the outside, and even if you went a little bit deeper, I'm willing to bet that there's just some level, whether it's in the family, whether it's through social interactions, whether it's through social conditioning, the media that says to suppress until one day you can't, and it shows up in these ways and we ignore these signs. And we really need to stop doing this and have the paradigm shift there with darkness and see it as our friend, not an enemy. It has so much data. It's a great motivator as well. So I mean, this last bullet point here where I talk about like when we talk about the dark aspects of the cosmos, right? Again, because they're mirrors to each other. We talk about dark matter, dark energy, the unobservable side of the universe. That's this really cool, interesting thing where you can get lots of data from. So why do we just apply it there and not within our minds? Like, why do we want to run away from that? right? And my guess is that there's like this removal you can have when you observe an environment, but when we don't acknowledge that consciousness is a layer of the universe that we're actively ignoring, you remove the inner experience and it prevents you from really being able to sit through and gain some powerful information. So I've talked about reality-based disorders. This isn't an official term. I just kind of came up with it because I've dealt with some myself. But I define it as a form of suffering where you have a psychiatric disorder and you're really questioning reality due to a number of symptoms like hyper-awareness, realizing you're manually breathing. Sorry to bring that realization today. Feeling that your eyeballs move, thinking about the fact that you have thoughts. Existentialism, am I real? Is this real? Did that really happen? Like, memory loss. There's false memory OCD. I've gone through that. It's really terrible. Experience of time being severely warped. Personality alters with dissociative identity disorder. Auditory, visual hallucinations, I've had those as well. Delusional thinking, the most hyperbolic thing, the most paranoia state that you could have, that becomes your ultimate reality, and there's just so much fear. And really, I feel for the people going through it. I've gone through a good chunk of these myself, but like the more you run away from it, the more it likes to sort of like come back. And this is part of really what I want to touch base with, right? Like we need to be able to find effective ways to get people to sit with these things and think about what it's telling us. So I was on route to making this, I made a few YouTube videos on this channel to talk about dark consciousness, and I wanted to have this appeal to like ethos, I guess. And I was looking at papers on schizophrenia. That's something I really want to specialize in. And I noticed that with DPDR, schizophrenia, psychosis, all of this, the papers are all just about neurobiological and neurochemical components. And it's great. I mean, the scientific community, I am not anti-science. Let me just make that very clear. I love science. We love science in this group. I'm just saying that there is this limitation because neurochemical neurobiological stuff really helps feeding like big pharma and giving medication to people. I have literally watched my brother with very severe autism turn into a vegetable through just medicine, no real help. Okay. You can say I'm not a big fan, but it doesn't mean I don't believe that it works. It works for people like if you have, your life has thrown you all these crazy, problems, and it's unbearable. So you need something that's equally powerful to help you feel better. So that's where I feel medication is really helpful. But this little funny thing of like intellectuals in parentheses obedient. What I mean by this is when I say it benefits intellectuals, these are the type of people, y'all, that like when you are talking to them, they can't tell you a thought that's come from their own mind. It's come from a podcast, a TikTok, a book. It's a quote of someone else's. I'm glad that you know what other people are talking about. I just want to know what goes on in your mind when those other things aren't on your mind, right? And this is where I feel like, if you're truly approaching this with a scientific, mindset, you will eventually find yourself in the incomprehensible realm where you're a little bit in awe, right? Like if you're not a little bit in awe with something going on, you're probably not deep into your studies enough. But like a lot of the times, people will only want to study up until the things that they can figure out and feel smart about. But like I'm saying, a lot of this stuff, it might fall on deaf ears. I'm okay with that because I definitely see a real push here for real change. It's affected me, affected a couple people that I know, like real change, real movement. And sometimes the classical measurement of linear time may not be the perfect model for the scientific method or measuring efficacy, but maybe we need to measure efficacy. I really think the way we measure effectiveness in how we impact people is going to be outside of an isolated system. This is why I had referred to the fact that consciousness models are extremely volatile. So how can you have a framework or just one medicine that can work for people that have different types of minds, even if their symptoms kind of fall into one way of being? And even when you look at the organization of some of this stuff, it's like the same symptoms that represent, BPD will represent ADHD, which will represent CPTSD. And we're so, into trying to find these lines. And what I'm almost wondering here is maybe should we come at this with the level of humility, in the same way that like when scientists are working with qubits and they are trying to get it into that state of superposition. You cannot observe something because once you observe it, it takes on a classical mechanics form, correct? So what they do is infer through wave patterns, math formulas, whatever. And I would like to actually apply that to the consciousness models as well. I'm wondering if instead of trying to figure some things out, maybe there aren't things that we can just figure out that they could be larger than what we understand. And maybe the first step to realizing everything is to realize that we don't know how to realize anything at all, or beyond a certain point. We can't do everything, right? So instead of trying to figure things out, we can move towards inferring things out. Because, I really find that the model of the brain and quantum reality seem to have wonderful overlaps. And so this is where I want to introduce part of my learning in tantric philosophy was learning about the panchakoshas, the five layers to yourself. This is really fascinating. Now, note here that every one of these layers ends in the word Maya. Maya is Sanskrit for illusion. So, like I said, this is still one body, right? Like you're not watching this, body get smaller and then turn into nothing. It's still a body. So, what this is trying to say, guys, is you get deeper and deeper into yourself. But like as long as you can achieve Anandamaya, which is the bliss body, which is like this, almost like a soulful expansion, this awakening, this awareness, this sense of home and centeredness in spite of what's going on in your environment. Um, and so as long as you do have this sense that you are you, that I am, my name is Shivani, like then I am in Maya, which is why all of these layers have the end Maya to them. And I really want to talk about the Vinyayamaya in particular, but I'll do a quick little rundown of every layer. Annamaya, Anna is Sanskrit for food. You can look at this as like you are what you consume, you are what you literally eat, right? And that affects your literal physical layer. That's the one we identify with the most. This is who I am, my hair, my eyes, all that. Pranamaya is the life force, your breath work that you do. Manomaya is your mind, your thoughts, emotions. Vinyayamaya is the place where your ego begins to dissolve. It's where you kind of look like an observer, because I had a Tantra philosophy mentor for a bit, and I had told her I felt like I was in a mascot costume where the mascot costume was my body and I was I observing, so I didn't know what I was. So this would be considered like, an aberration of being in Vinyaya Maya. I've made this little graph. Stick with me here. Okay. I believe that the Vinyaya Maya is the root of all reality-based disorders. I'm going to break this down, okay? So what we see on the x-axis is the Anna, Prana, Mano, Vinyaya, and Anandamaya, right, in that order. And so I guess in this simple little graphic, whoopsie, we see that like, it appears that the size scaling down is linear. I don't believe you can really just linear unless you are a crazy good monk. I don't think you can just get into steps like that so quickly. So that's why both of these lines are more parabolic in nature, because it takes, each layer to get to the next one, it takes longer and longer to be in it. Now, I've kind of drawn this little line here between mind body and where mind body soul gets involved. So, all the way up until Manomaya is the mind body. If you remember, Anna is consumption food, Prana is breath, Mano is mind. Now, Vinyayamaya is where ego dissolution takes place, and you have this awareness that you are larger than life, and there's this almost like shared bottleneck at the Vinyayamaya. So, if you're struggling with reality, this is probably why. This place is all sorts of out of whack. And when we talk about, well, how do you want to go in between these layers, right, of your way of being, what is the most permeable piece of matter we can work with that's like light as a feather, right? That would be, breath, but breath kind of can be a bit heavy too. So it's why a lot of people from these ancient cultures, they were really deep into vibration and understanding vibration, because if you want to get into Anandamaya, it's going to be about really, really hopping into that stillness. That stillness is going to come from heavy acceptance of, reality. And as long as we run away from the chaos in our minds, my belief is that like we kind of deny ourselves being an Andamaya. But what I want to say, the good news is the suffering path progress, as you can see, kind of accelerates into how much you can get out of an Andamaya, because there's no motivator like pain and suffering, because you want to get rid of it immediately. And so, that's why I started looking into all these different concepts and topics when a psychiatrist, a neurologist, a therapist, all of that, like it wasn't working for me anymore. I was like, well, what is something I can do to learn more about what's going on? And, usually when people have like a steady path, a chill life, I'm not encouraging suffering by any means. I'm actually just encouraging motivation to learn. And it just so happens that suffering is the greatest form of motivation. And then that's where you really kind of like take off with your learning there. So Actually, I believe that people who go through reality-based disorders might be the closest to Anandamaya. They might be the closest to this awakening. And the ego is just going to do what the ego needs to do. That level of self-preservation, self-concept, right? Where it's like, no, 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 I'm still me. I want to hang on to who I am and who I'm meant to be. And then there's like this other part of you that's just, awakening. And I think that part needs to be really well taken care of and facilitated in that zone to help people kind of go into Anandamaya with the level of guidance. Let's talk about this really cool thing here. I was reading one of the papers on DPDR, and they brought up this multi-scale dissociation index with six main domains, DP and DR being like, the main ones I worked with because I had DPDR. And wouldn't you know, everything in the weakness unintegrated state has its exact version in the empowerment state. Now, I think this is mind-blowing because when you are in depersonalization, you're actually on the pathway to the fourth state of consciousness, the first three being awake, sleeping, dreaming. And the fourth state is kind of this movement in between. And when you're depersonalizing, you're detached from yourself. You're not really sure what time you're in and all of that. But that like energy that you're able to experience, it has its positive. It's really that when we're introduced to these things because our society really doesn't encourage touching base with the soul at deeper levels, we're not aware. So you get handed all of this stuff. You don't have the vocabulary words. I mean, certainly Turiya is not going to be something you find on the internet just casually. This is something that comes from this wisdom. And there's this pathway there. And it's taken a long time for me to create these charts and graphs and like do these mappings from these realizations that I've had. But even with derealization, like, am I real? What's happening? Great questions. All of it's true because it's all Maya. It's an illusion. And it's really what's happening is like, how can we go from feeling unintegrated when we have these powerful feelings, all these realizations, and how can we move towards feeling really awakened in having these, right? So that's what a lot of the work I want to touch on will be about. I've kind of touched on this already, but like the most permeable form of, let's say, matter would be like a vibration, right? To move in between the topmost layer of your existence all the way into your core. And so there's this deity in our culture named Nada Brahma who indicates, it's basically saying the universe is sound. More specifically, the universe is just vibration. It's all just vibes. And this really aligns with the values of thermodynamics and Spandakarika as well, that everything is that vibration. It's just that movement, right? We have some current applications that we see with sound healing that are outside of sound baths. We have ultrasound, we have gong therapy, we have binaural beats. I believe, for people who have ADHD, like they almost like make up for the deltas, or it helps your brain make up for the deltas in like different frequencies in each ear, something like that. Stimulating the vagus nerve through like singing. When I'd get stuck in my body, I would literally be unable to move. So I'd have to like, force my chest to like cough something out and say something and make that sound. But when you vibrate the vagus nerve, it really, really grounds you, right? It's the longest nerve in our nervous system, really important for somatic healing. Mantra and Siddha medicine, I don't have time to really get into here, but just trust it's some mind-blowing work. Siddha medicine is really just, in ancient times, there were these people that looked almost like, beggars. They were just really humble people named Siddhas, and they had siddhis, and these just, you might even call them powers, right? Like with how limited we are with what we're able to do just as pure human beings without tech devices, we're not able to do much. But so with Siddha medicine, right, it kind of ties into a level of quantum biology, just being very connected with elements at such a small level, at such a vibrational level that you can have more impact than what you think a normal human being can do. And then, people kind of drop off here because they start thinking, well, oh, this sounds really magical. Well, magic to me is really just unexplained science, right? Like everything has an explanation. And, even with spirituality and science, they're besties, right? They're not enemies. And people like to pit them against each other. That's just, you can't have one without the other, but really, really fascinating stuff. Okay. Well, this is how I'm going to kind of tie it all back together. We have the universal mind, our mind, and algorithms. So the universal mind is this idea of Brahman, like we're all a big, cute family of super consciousness, and our mind and how it's almost like a little drop in the big ocean of all of this, right? So we have, dating apps, your social media, For You page, movie recommendations on Netflix. These are all based on algorithms that collect data on you, that have feedback loops, that present things to you, see how you react, how long you're looking at that result for. It's just changing, evolving all the time. And what I think is so fascinating is like anytime we create like a brand new funky little device that can do lots of computations, we kind of link it back to like, oh, it's like the human brain. Like when the phone was invented, it was like the brain. It's an iPhone, it's like the brain. The computer, it's like the brain. And so in this way, we're like kind of mimicking algorithms in the ways our minds work very quickly. They very quickly do them. We don't even notice it. We're learning machines, and this is where I think Tantra also steps in too. Like, we think that we can't do something, we're not able to move beyond a certain, point. That's just not true. We're learning machines. We're always evolving and growing. And so where I say we're somewhat on the right track, we do this algorithm understanding for like physical objects, but not really for consciousness as much. So the Spandakarika, I've called this super intelligent cosmic algorithm, cosmic meritocracy that gets you in alignment. Akashic Records, I'm going to shout out my friend Emma here, who like really brought this to light in my mind, because I wouldn't have done a little deep dive if it weren't for her. But this is a super intelligent cosmic hard drive, where is all the information stored, and the primary constituents of an Akashic Record thing would be photons and phonons, which are the lowest form, or sorry, I guess the smallest form of light and sound. Um, Now, aberrations of the mind. Pharmaceuticals are real great. Like they do what they need to do, but I like to call this topical consciousness work. Like you have like, a little sunscreen you put on your face or something to get rid of your acne when really you just need to like break up with that guy and that's like the root cause that will get rid of that. It's kind of similar to that. We're trying to figure that out at a deeper level. So you can have topical work with some talk therapy, and it helps to a degree. Again, I'm not against it, but there's like a point where we do need to get a little bit deeper, right? With some true root cause analysis. And I think that's where the true healing takes place. And I believe this RCA will come from like a synthesis, not just, and I really have this amazing respect, right, for scientists that have gone down the route and they've focused on, individual topics and become experts in them. And I also think we need to have this interdisciplinary approach to, dark consciousness, because it's something that just exists and we can't seem to. I'm not saying I'm trying to solve the problem of human suffering in one go in this lifetime here, but I'm trying to get pretty damn close, and just try to understand how it all works. And I think this will come from understanding cosmology. It's not different from the mind. Like in the beginning of the talk, I said, wow, these things seem so separate, but they're actually one, which is great. And we need to kind of let go of shame and guilt. It don't mean if you feel it, feel your feelings. I'm just saying it's a difference between characteristic versus character. Okay, like it's fine if shame, insecurity, guilt, all of that is a characteristic, but we really don't want that to be the way we operate, okay? And no more othering of darkness. Done with that. We need to have open-mindedness as well. Open-mindedness coming from like going away from like the belief systems you've been taught your whole life, like everything on this end is just really bad, it deserves to suffer in eternity, this is demonic, this is that, and to kind of having this more unitary consciousness approach to things, right? I think that's where like we might stop looking at things as just about dark and light consciousness, right? And there's just wonderful things like the Hopfield neural network was something I was actually taking a look at, like just this way of how is memory stored? How does like network and conversation between information evolve? And I'm still on my learning journey here, so you can learn along with me. But I feel that you will need a little piece of that as well. There's computational neurology is this booming field and they're doing really great things. And my little petty psychology behind beyond Western Quizlet learning. I guess in college we always had Quizlet flashcards to like learn vocabulary words for psychology, and everyone thought of it as a joke. But like psychology is actually really complex, guys. Like it is so beyond what we understand. And like even Alan Watts, incredible dude, also giving like a pretty, solid like translation of what some of these esoteric pieces of wisdom are trying to deliver. So we really also need to acknowledge that it's not just, is this confirmation bias? Are you just feeling low today? Like, no, there's more to it than that. And I'm just gonna kind of say that the multiverse is our muse. Like a lot of the times people are like, what's the point of learning about this stuff? It doesn't impact us in our day to day. Well, now there's people studying quantum reality. Now there's this intersection of computation and neuroscience and psychology, right? So it is our muse, and it would behoove us to understand it and use it to understand ourselves and vice versa. I put a little photo of a horse here because I said behoove and horses have hooves. All right. Just a little taste of mapping some esoteric stuff to brain memory. I was just thinking, they call the Akashic records, actually, who's they? It was me. I call them the Great Cosmic Hard Drive, but I'm like, where is it located? And then I started thinking about the brain's memory. Where is my memory located? Is it localized in any place? The answer for both is no. If this graph right now doesn't blow your mind, you guys have not been paying attention, okay? The storage location, there is none. It's everywhere. It's not localized. And the way it records information is on the thing itself. Talk about space efficiency usage. Oh my God. Think of it this way. If there's somebody really, really old and they have all these smile lines, you're like, wow, this person must have smiled so much in their life. It's like, this wasn't logged away in like a journal that's like 500 million pages, like, Dear Diary, today I smiled. Dear Diary, today I smiled. Like, it's right there. You can see it. You can see it. All the Dear Diaries are right here. So I think that's just so wonderful because, like, in the way, even with brain memory, like how we record things is like, if you remember that, like, going down this street, there's like some cockroaches and you really hate cockroaches, something like that. You won't go down that street, and your pathway, the grooves your brain will access are going to be, just different. And for both things, like, memory changes. I think even in neuroscience, when we look back at memory, sometimes too, it's a little bit hyperbolic, isn't it? Like, there's like minor deviations. I don't know if we like remember everything extremely perfectly in detail all the time. And both for the Akashic records, just going to call it cosmic memory, both for that and the brain memory, there's just this, constant remembering always taking place and always logging, and access is available. And who knows, maybe one of the implications here is building these energetic models and landscapes that, we can do a little bit further research with, understanding things like Alzheimer's, right? Or like if you're looking at Akashic records and you're wanting to like access certain memory beyond lifetime, what have you, like, there's a way you have to go about accessing these things. But isn't it fascinating that they seem to follow similar aspects and similar, like, frameworks and structures? I mean, this is really mind-blowing stuff right here. I just love it. And just a little snippet, right, of like how we can map the external cosmos to our internal consciousness and how they behave pretty similarly. My ultimate goal. My guy SpongeBob. Point one. I want to get people to think inside the box because the answer is always within. My guy SpongeBob here in this episode, if you guys haven't seen it, it's called Idiot Box. It was my favorite episode of all time as a kid. Little did I know how much they were deeply philosophically talking about quantum reality and changing your environment. Wow, I mean, very profound stuff. My guy, the sponge, he comes out here talking to Squidward about imagination. And they go, again, they're in the box. They close the box. They think inside the box, right? And him and Patrick, they're having a great time. Point is, based on the way they view reality, they're actually experiencing it. And it's so powerful that even Squidward's getting a dose. And he's like, yo, what's going on? Why are you on top of a mountain? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And he's like, I don't see anything. And SpongeBob is all about this imagination, but we need to, understand that is a lot of how things look, and like the way, things are not always like what they appear to be if you are conditioned to only look at it in one way. And again, really emphasizing personal power here and internal realization, right? We're always taught to look externally. There's so much within. I want us to start going beyond the binaries of light versus dark, this versus that. Admittedly, it's extremely difficult for me to also do. But I really feel like this can lead to a paradigm shift in healing people who suffer from reality-based disorders. And for me personally, like, I am kind of using this group, this meetup group, to like talk about the research I'm doing and integrate with people and be like, what's on people's minds? What are their nihilistic questions? And like, where can I kind of come in? But I would love to research the frontier of science, the edge of reality, and just get into that place of, magic, where things are incomprehensible, and attempt to make it comprehensible in this lifetime, and impact and heal a lot of people, that suffer from acts against humanity and have these, like, residual disorders as a result. Ultimately, I would love to do like some, when I say phenomenal cosmic power, like research, I really mean understanding cosmology and consciousness as similar levels at like micro scales and micro scales, and how these energetic systems behave together. So yeah, that was, again, I understand that a lot of this was was quite a bit. And I know I threw a lot of information at you, and I'm almost at the 90-minute mark here, got 9 minutes left. But yeah, I just, want to say thank you. If there's people I can't see who really stuck around for the whole thing, but if you did, so much love to you. This is really hard for me to do, like, because I've only given talks when it's come from like, my perspective of like in a school, in an institution for a project, and this is so like self-led. I really don't want to go back to corporate America, and I'm wanting to do everything I can to put my best foot forward. I have like a donations pledge thing on my group page, so whoever finds this valuable, there's no pressure, but if you feel that I can actually do something in this world, which I hope you do, which is what I aim to prove, then definitely drop some love over there because I can continue making this dream a reality. And, we don't have to stick to the boring way of approaching, life and science and corporate stuff. We can make things fantastic. We can make things different. We can actually heal people and not have them stuck in these cycles. So yeah, again, there will be deep dives on these topics in future talks and different deviations. This is also not even everything. This is just like a little bit, guys, of scratching the surface of what there is in the realm of tantric philosophy, dark consciousness, cosmology, and all of that. But I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here. And yeah, that is everything. We have a few minutes left here, so if people have any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, I'm going to start taking a look at the chat right now.